Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. Hope everyone is doing okay. Let me check my volume. Today has been essentially a catch up with sleep day. Seems like I can go for a few days without and then keel over. My wife was like, I couldn't wake you. It's like, well, I haven't slept in a few days. Give me a break. But that being said, my grandmother had a birthday party today. I did drag myself out of bed for that, so that was nice. Beyond that, let's play catch up. Let's do the news, at least for the next hour or so, while my powers stand out, and while this edible doesn't drag me down and make me hit my head on the counter. That said, one of the things I want to talk about today has to do with an article written by Glenn Ford. Glenn Ford is... I use the term lion for Glenn Greenwald, so I need to come up with something else. He's an Iron Warrior. Let's use Iron Warrior. Glenn Ford is fucking amazing. Now, Glenn Ford, I'm not going to do his piece, but I do want to talk about something he brought up in his piece. Can you wait up? I'm the only one here. Well, I don't tend to wait up because I tend to assume that people are going to land and they'll play catch up. Because other people are going to watch the video, and if it's... when there's too much of a gap in between. I process this in the way I process videos when I watch. This video is not necessarily meant to be longer. There are other videos where I want to actually sit and talk, but this video is one I just kind of want to do. That's why I don't wait up in the beginning on some videos. But let me get back to the point. So, well, I don't want to lose my thread. When I lose my thread, things go bad. I don't write these out. Like, it's not where I have this stuff written out. It's a thread in my head. And when I feel the thread is at its brightest, I was like, fuck it, let's go. In which case, I've already kind of read through the articles. I have all the information where I can give a summary of it. And then at that point, people can go see the articles and see the more details. And towards the end of the video, I tend to go details. At least that's the theme that I tend to go with. Nevertheless, let's get back to the thread. Glenn Ford, Iron Warrior Glenn Ford, comes up with an article where he talks about the Russiagate thing. Now, Glenn Ford has an amazing focus from the standpoint of race. Unequivocal, no hedge. This is how I see the world. Now, in this particular piece, he hits something that I miss, but I miss because it's so clear and present that I just assume everyone else sees it. But I think sometimes it's great to call out a certain degree of hypocrisy or a certain degree of, hey, if you really do believe this, then how is this other thing true? Because both don't follow. Now, this particular point hits on the issue of identity. Now, Democrats have ended up with a fetish for Russians. Oh, these voluptuous Russians. They love them. They look for them in every closet and under every rug. But there's something that's interesting about this that Glenn Ford hits on. To some degree, the Russiagate narrative gets across the level of exploitation of African Americans. Meaning, what Democrats are willing to do to get the African American vote, while at the same token not necessarily doing anything to back up the fact that they're getting those votes. Do you remember this? This took place in many of our lifetimes. It took place in my lifetime. I'm a dinosaur. Let's do some ancient history.
Vice President and President of the Senate presided over the event that would officially anoint George W. Bush as the new president. If any congressman wanted to raise an objection, the rules insisted that he or she had to have the signed support of just one senator.
Mr. President, and I take great pride in calling you that, I must object because of the overwhelming evidence of official misconduct, deliberate fraud, and an attempt to suppress voter turnout.
The chair must remind members that under Section 18 of Title III, United States Code, no debate is allowed in the joint session.
Thank you, Mr. President. To answer your question, Mr. President, the objection is in writing. signed by a number of members of the House of Representatives, but not by a member of the Senate.
Mr. President, it is in writing and signed by several House colleagues on behalf and myself of the 27,000 voters of Duval County, in which 16,000 of them are African Americans that was disenfranchised in this last election.
Is the objection signed by a member of the Senate?
Not signed by a member of the Senate. The Senate is missing.
Mr. President, it is in writing and signed by myself on behalf of many of the diverse constituents in our country, especially those in the 9th Congressional District, and all American voters who recognize that the Supreme Court, not the people of the United States, decided this election.
Is the objection signed by a senator?
Unfortunately, Mr. President, it is not signed by one single senator.
Unfortunately, I have no authority over the United States Senate, and no senator has signed.
You know what you're watching there? That's failure. That's weakness and resistance rolled into one. Weakness by some, resistance by others. But the resistance to some degree highlights the level of weakness and failure in that moment. Al Gore. Al fucking Gore. So this goes back to the Bush v. Gore election. There was massive disenfranchisement of African American voters in Florida, hundreds of thousands. And if you remember, the range at which Bush supposedly won that state was only about a few thousand votes. Hundreds of thousands of African Americans were disenfranchised from the voter rolls. What you saw there, African American Asian woman standing up saying, this election was fraudulent. It was stolen. They stole this election from the Democratic candidate. And the weakness of Al Gore, the vice president, gaveling down one soldier after the next, standing up for his own best interest, and he's gaveling them down. They're fighting for him, and he is gaveling them down. Think of this moment of what's taking place here. Let's finish the video. It's an amazing thing to watch. They're standing up trying to fight for Al Gore. And Al Gore, weak, pathetic, forlorn, disembodied, gaveling them down one by one. Let's finish the video.
Mr. President, it is in writing and signed by myself and several of my constituents from Florida. A senator is needed, but missing.
Is the objection in writing and signed by a member of the House and a senator?
The objection is in writing, and I don't care that it is not signed by a member of the Senate.
The chair will advise that the rules do care, and the signature of the senator.
Not a single senator came to the aid of the African Americans in Congress. One after another, they were told to sit down and shut up.
And it's a sad day in America, Mr. President, when we can't find a senator to sign
the
objections.
Gentleman will suspend.
They couldn't get one Democratic senator to stand up for the African Americans that were disenfranchised in Florida. And by the way, the African Americans that were disenfranchised in Florida essentially allowed George Bush to win that election. Mind you, and I'm trying to make a point here, it is true that the Supreme Court to some degree was going to give it over to them, but they could have challenged this election here. They had the opportunity to challenge the election with the argument of there are hundreds of thousands of African Americans that were unfairly, illegally disenfranchised, and they could not get one Democratic senator to stand up for it. The person who was cheated by this, I would make an argument that says, well, he was the avatar of the entirety of the country. But that person, so weak, a wet macaroni noodle, would not even fight for himself. Now, explain to me this idea of resistance when you can't even get, when they're actually trying to form a resistance. One Democratic senator. Now, fast forward for a moment. Let's have this conversation about Russiagate. Now, I bring this video up because I want you to see that Democrats have a history of failure within regards to standing up for the interests of African Americans. We don't ask for much. The vote is almost perfunctory. You get the vote just by standing on the ballot. There is a D, all right, you're automatically going to get a bunch of blacks willing to hug you. Hillary Clinton having hot sauce in her pocket is next. Standing up for the people is different. That's more profound. That's something that you should have done. You should have done that just by virtue of you being a politician in that office and being the avatar of their will, fighting for their particular interests. If you remember, one of the things that people are so angry with Sanders is because they feel like Sanders didn't represent their interests when the cheating was taking place. Fast forward back to 2000. There's a history of this. There's a context. Now, move up a little bit to today. The same thing is taking place. Where is it? Right here. Great Palace. So starting in 2013, just as the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act, a coterie of Trump operatives under the direction of Chris Kobach, Kansas Secretary of State, created a system to purge 1.1 million Americans of color from the voter rolls of GOP-controlled states. Now, the reason they say voters of color has to do with the way the system operates. Crosscheck would take certain names, and they would say, look, there's a Bob Dole in Florida, and there's a Bob Dole in Kansas, and it looks like Bob Dole may be trying to vote twice. Now, it would give no mind to it being Bob R. Dole. Bob Dole's on it. The catch is, certain racial groups, be it African Americans, Hispanics, Asians, they have certain similarities in last names. And so if you get rid of certain people with certain last names, then you're automatically getting rid of a certain percentage of people that are of a particular racial demographic. This is fascinating because for the most part, you get into this thing of percentages, meaning there will be some white people with the last name of Washington, but 90% of the people would be African American. That's fucking fascinating. It's so fucking nasty. Because democracy, why? The goal of it is to win. Where is it? I want to be specific. All right, let's go right here. Sweetland's statistical analysis found that African Americans, Latino, and Asian names predominate, a simple result of cross-check matching process, which spews out little more than a bunch of common names. No surprise, the U.S. Census data shows that minorities are overrepresented in 85 to 100 of the most common last names. If your name is Washington, there's an 89% chance you're African American. If your last name is Hernandez, there's a 94% chance you're Hispanic. If your name is Kim, there's a 95% chance you're Asian. This inherent bias results in an astonishing 1 in 6 Hispanics, 1 in 7 Asian Americans, and 1 in 9 African Americans in cross-check states landing on the list. Was the program designed to target voters of color? I'm a data guy, Sweetland says. I can't tell you what the intent was. I can tell you what the outcome is, and the outcome is discriminatory against minorities. I'm putting all of these articles at the bottom. You can read it for yourself if you want more information on it. A process was designed politically to exclude African Americans, Asians, Hispanics, because these demographics vote in large part Democrat. African Americans to the tune of like 80, 90%. Just any random Democrat that's on the ballot. Hispanics, like 70%. Asians also up there extremely high. You have a large percentage, meaning minorities, overwhelmingly, to such an insane degree, vote Democrat. So if you are a Republican and you want to cut down the number of the people who are voting against you, you come up with a system that says, let's statistically attack people of particular demographics. And why wouldn't you? You're a corporation. Your job as a corporation is to win. whatever the field of interest that you're in. If it's in selling Pepsis, your goal is to sell more Pepsis than a competition. If your goal is a Republican, your goal is to get more than the other party. And that's what they did. Now, you could say, what about democracy? What about representative government? What about fairness? What about fair play? And I keep making the point, none of those things apply. This is politics. The goal of the political space is to win. You are the avatar of people in the society that want you to win. The case in this is Republicans' goal, or the people who they represent, tends to be a tiny, tiny percent, which means they have less support in the population, which means logically, the strategies that they would use would be to eliminate people on the other side while maximizing their own. So you can use identity politics to, marriage people up and everything else. But here's the catch. Democrats use similar identity politics, but this is to some degree them playing within the space to which they find. My point here, and I don't want to go beyond my main thread. Certain demographics are being attacked. Those demographics that are being attacked are demographics that tend to vote for the other party. Put a pin in that. Fast forward to Russiagate. The numbers that I'm going to give you here are the numbers that took place in the purge of this election. The margin of victory in Michigan was 13,000 votes. Michigan purged 449,000 voters. In Arizona, 85,000 votes. Arizona purged 270,000 voters. Victory margin in North Carolina, 177,000 votes. North Carolina purged 589,000 voters. Hillary Clinton lost this race with the disenfranchisement of African Americans, Asians, and Hispanics. That's the truth of the matter. Now, explain to me, get it across to me, make it clear to me, with any random Democrat, explain to me, why are you screaming about Russia? Why? Explain to me this. You lost the race to Gore, lost the popular vote. And in many respects, that popular vote, that loss, wasn't challenged in Congress by the Senate, by the way, in a real way, meaning a senator coming up, standing up with the African Americans saying, you stole this race from us because you disenfranchised us from this vote. Nobody did that. Fast forward to John Kerry. They did do that in Kerry's race. They did challenge it in Congress. Fast forward to this race. You had to put Clinton's arm behind her back to get her to challenge with Jill Stein. And even then, it was Jill Stein that challenged her with Clinton barely signing her name onto it in this haphazard, ass-backwards way of doing it. Between the people who would have the money to put into that, Clinton would have the money to put into that in order to go for a recount. I don't understand why you have to put money into getting a recount. Is it a representative government or not? Is it a democracy or not? If it's the representative government, you should want to know who's voting in your race. That's the first point. The second point of this is a little bit more fundamental. One of your main voting demographics, one of the pillars that prop up your party, is being disenfranchised. Not just this year, not just the year before, not just the year before, not just the year before, not just the year before. That times 16. Because you're going all the way back to Bush v. Gore. And you're talking about Russians. The thing that's provable and demonstrative is that the Republican Party has disenfranchised an element of your base and has done it systemically or systematically for the past several elections, including this election. And you're telling me that Russians cheating you, the thing that's provable and demonstrative is the thing that they've attacked your demographic, your voting demographic. Now, the thing that Glenn Ford brings up, and I think Glenn Ford has a damn good point on, how are you screaming about Russia? The data set that's available to you, that's straightforward to you, your base is being utterly attacked, completely, outright, in the open. I just gave you the numbers. These numbers aren't magical. These numbers are straightforward and clear. This is what the Republican Party did to your main voting demographic. And you're screaming about Russians. It's as if you're sitting here with me, but Russians have a voluptuous ass. And you want to get your hands on the voluptuous ass, even though you're sitting here with me. What am I to think about that? You want me to vote for you. You use my vote. You use us. You hug darkies. Hillary Clinton talking about having hot sauce in her purse. That's great with the hot sauce. What about protecting my vote? What about protecting the vote of people that look like me? I think that those people are somewhat delusional for voting for you, but at the very least, they should still get that delusional vote. It is their vote to make. Either this is a representative government or not. I'm making a simple point. I understand that you may think Russians did something to you, that you may think Russians attacked democracy. What is this? What is this? This is literally, completely, unequivocally, an attack on democracy and the democratic process. This is not the thing that you're challenging. You're not standing up for the African Americans and the Hispanics and the Asian Americans. You're not being warriors and a resistance for them trying to fight this, making this an issue, pointing to the fact that these people are being cheated and robbed and disenfranchised all throughout the United States, home of democracy and liberty, where you can't potentially, depending on who you are and your racial demographics, get a vote, because neither party is willing to stand up and support you, including the party that scams you constantly for votes. Look at this. Today, among Florida's black population, the rate of disenfranchisement was high, with nearly a quarter of African Americans prohibited from voting. That's amazing. In Florida, apparently there's lifetime disenfranchisement, meaning if you get arrested and you lose your voting rights, it's forever. I understand that they may think Russia is this overlying threat to democracy. What I will put forth to you is you've lost multiple elections because of the African American vote being disenfranchised. And if indeed you're supposedly representing African American interests, one of those interests is making sure we can participate in the political process. You're fiending and fetishizing over the voluptuous Russian ass, as opposed to the beauty that you have sitting beside you. And what I will put forth to African Americans is, if your party is not representing you, maybe you should think twice about supporting and representing your party. So I'm going to end this here. This one has gone far too long, but I think the point should be crystal clear. If African Americans are really going to waste their vote on the Democratic Party, you should get something out of it. And if the Democratic Party is not willing to go to bat for you over something as basic and fundamental as your capacity and your ability to vote, then maybe you should think twice about going to bat for them. This is something just basic. Voting is quid pro quo. Why on earth are you giving your vote for somebody who's not willing to stand up for your interests? Look at this again, just so you're clear about this. Al Gore, weak, unbearably weak. Al Gore and his party was not willing to go to bat to represent hundreds of thousands of you. And as such, we end up with George fucking Bush as president of the United States. Donald Trump ended up in office in many of the same ways. Don't cry too much about this, because ultimately you guys were willing to purge in the primaries also. So yeah, kick fucking rocks on that, with me being completely sympathetic to your cause. But that said, just from a technical detail and from a technical standpoint, it is true. Look at this. Your weakness hurts my eyes.
Bush as the new president. If any congressman wanted to raise an objection, the rules insisted that he or she had to have the signed support of just one senator.
Mr. President, and I take great pride in calling you that, I must object because of the overwhelming evidence of official misconduct, deliberate fraud, and an attempt to suppress voter turnout.
The chair must remind members that under Section 18 of Title III, United States Code, no debate is allowed in the joint session.
Thank you, Mr. President. To answer your question, Mr. President, the objection is in writing, signed by a number of members of the House of Representatives, but not by a member of the Senate.
Mr. President, it is in writing and signed by several House colleagues on behalf and myself of the 27,000 voters of Duval County, in which 16,000 of them are African Americans that was disenfranchised in this last election.
Is the objection signed by a member of the Senate?
Not signed by a member of the Senate. The Senate is missing.
Mr. President, it is in writing and signed by myself on behalf of many of the diverse constituents in our country, especially those in the 9th Congressional District, and all American voters who recognize that the Supreme Court, not the people of the United States, decided this election.
Is the objection signed by a senator?
Unfortunately, Mr. President, it is not signed by one single senator.
Unfortunately, I have no authority over the United States Senate, and no senator has signed.
Mr. President, it is in writing and signed by myself and several of my constituents from Florida. A senator is needed, but missing.
Is the objection in writing and signed by a member of the House and a senator?
The objection is in writing, and I don't care that it is not signed by a member of the Senate.
The chair will advise that the rules do care, and the signature of the senator.
Not a single senator came to the aid of the African Americans in Congress. One after another, they were told to sit down and shut up.
And it's a sad day in America, Mr. President, when we can't find a senator to sign the
gentleman.
Objection.
Sad day in America indeed. And we're still there 18 years later. They are screaming about Russia while you are being disenfranchised. Just be aware that as they make this stuff about Russia and all this other stuff, that you, for the most part, are being ignored. Your rights are being ignored. You're being trampled and trespassed on. And the people who you are giving your votes to are standing by and letting it happen while chasing Russian ass. A ghost, if I call it that. Jamal, can you rant on Bernie and Ron Paul video? Oh God, everybody's going to make me do that Bernie and Ron Paul, that Bernie video about Russians. I'll check it. I'll check it. What channel am I described to? Look, I'm trying to use somewhat of an analogy here. Like in my head, it's you're sitting beside somebody or you're looking at somebody else. And from the standpoint of if you're a guy, I always use this idea of the politically abused spouse. You have something beside you. And God, look at that other thing. And by the way, part of the reason that they do this, that they're not using this issue as opposed to the Russian issue, the Russian issue gets them two things that they want. They want to be able to eviscerate Trump on this issue, constrain Trump's hand on this issue from the standpoint of his latitude of action based on the attack itself, but also a McCarthyism. They want to be able to attack the left. That Hillary Clinton didn't lose the election because she was a miserable candidate. She lost because of Russian interference, or lost because of Russian interference. This, to some degree, has a way of propping up the idea of status quo, which is why I don't like this way that Sanders aids and abets the Democratic Party in propping this particular agenda. By the same token, I understand that Sanders doesn't necessarily want to go against the current on this. And he may even believe it. I suspect he probably doesn't care about it one way or the other, seeing as they cheated him. But the politics of it demands a certain amount of conformity in order to even get your ideas out, because you don't necessarily want the first question in an interview every time you have an interview to say, why don't you believe the Russia stuff? Anything you say after that is going to have a headwind. This is politics. Of course it's politics, because these are politicians. Beyond the politics, however, is reality. And the reality is African Americans are being disenfranchised. And the Democratic Party, instead of backing up their main workhorse, they're going after ghosts. They're going after ghosts. So, yeah, Glenn Ford. Glenn Ford was the one that came up with the tie-in. All right. I'm going to end this one because I have a slew of videos that I want to do. One on Assange, one on TYT, tax avoidance. One of my subscribers sent me that one. That one is amazing. I have mixed feelings about doing it, but I'm going to do it anyway. So, all right. Bernie was a moderate during the civil rights movement. And here we go, another 2 hours. Nope. I'm ending this here. If you enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe. You can always support through Patreon. I will be back in 10 minutes when I load up the next videos. I have a slew of that I want to do tonight. So I need to do it while I'm not being affected. All right, guys. You all have a good one. I'll see you shortly. Hang around. Promise you no more than 5 minutes for the reload. Thanks, guys.